This is Jonathan Agger, fifth Pro Boxing Fans, joined by journalist Dan Rafael, who was on the ground in Las Vegas last week covering the biggest fight of the year, Canelo Crawford. Dan, I know you were covering it all week for Fight Freaks Unite and the Big Fight Weekend podcast, which I am planning on listening to. I've been
Good.
so busy. But yeah, how did everything go with that, first of all?
It went. I mean, it wasn't maybe the greatest fight week ever. I think I'll just say maybe with UFC and Zuffa, there's maybe a few growing pains, let's say, when it comes to dealing with boxing press. But everybody was nice, and the setup in the stadium, as far as the way they for the fans, the way they did the whole production was amazing. The fight hotel, I had never stayed at the Fontainebleau before. It was a beautiful hotel. So I mean, there was a lot of good things about it, and obviously, the most important thing is we got a first class fight and a brilliant performance from Terence Crawford, a good performance from Canelo, just not enough to necessarily get the victory. But it was a big fight. It did big numbers for Netflix, not necessarily on the level of what they did for Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, which goes to a whole different level in terms of the type of audience that they would attract. But this was a very big fight, and obviously a very historic result with Terence Crawford becoming, doing all the things he did. It's not just one thing. He became a 5-division champion, a 3-division undisputed champion, a 4-division lineal champion. The first ever fighter in the multi-belt era, 2, 3, or 4 belts to win an undisputed title in 3 weight classes. The first undisputed 3-division champion of any kind, going all the way back to the 1-belt era since 1938. I mean, he checked a lot of boxes. Like, I joked with him at the press conference, like, he filled out a whole resume worth of historical stuff in one fight. Whereas if it had been Canelo Alvarez who had been the winner, would have been a great win for him, beating another Hall of Famer and defending your title. But it would have just been, in terms of the historical elements, a title defense. But because Crawford was the winner, he got a lot of stuff to go towards his historical place in this sport.
The odds were shortening as we led up to the fight last weekend, but I don't think everyone still believed that Canelo was going to pull this one off, given the size, or most people did anyway. What do you think Crawford did so well that Canelo couldn't negate?
Well, my pick was Crawford by decision, so I wasn't shocked. I mean, I just feel like the size was a little bit overblown, the supposed size difference, because having seen Crawford, particularly, and I looked closely when they had done their press conferences, when the promotion kicked off, and they had done a press conference in Riyadh, then they went to New York City, then they went to Las Vegas, and when you watch them pose with each other, and this is before they've done their full training camp, so they're not even like in prime shape just yet. Terence Crawford actually is a little bit taller than Canelo Alvarez. Reach-wise, he's got a longer reach than Canelo Alvarez. So, and I know the type of diligent trainer that Crawford is. He's never come to his fights not in condition. And I just thought that because of the fact that the weight was, in my mind, not that big of a difference. My only question was, how is he going to take the punch? And he took it fine. Canelo hadn't shown a huge amount of power in recent fights. He's gotten some knockdowns, but hadn't knocked anybody out. And to his credit, he got himself in phenomenal condition also. But I just felt like the size was a little bit overblown. So now you go to the next bunch of metrics or categories or whatever you want to call it. And I feel like that Terence Crawford was faster, both with his hands and his feet. Terence Crawford also has shown throughout his career a good chin, as obviously Canelo has one of the great chins of all time. In 100-plus fights between these two men, neither one had ever been officially knocked down before. Doesn't mean that couldn't happen, especially with Crawford moving up the weight classes, but I was pretty confident that he would do okay because his defense is very sound. And so all that, plus the fact that I believe as a technical boxer, just the different things that he can do was better than Canelo. And I have felt for the last, several fights that Canelo was starting to slow down. I know that Crawford was coming off of a longer layoff. He's been basically a once-a-year fighter. He'd coming off a 13-month layoff since the Madrimov fight, where he didn't look particularly great in that fight going to 154, as Canelo did not look very good when he fought the fight in May against William Skull. So while I couldn't shake sort of the thought of those performances, I also sort of chalked each of them up to something to the extent that they weren't nearly as motivated for those fights as they would be for each other. It's a different ball game when you're preparing for another, spectacular fighter, Hall of Fame type fighter, than it is you're preparing for Israel Madrimov, who you probably never heard of until you signed the contract. And likewise with Canelo, who probably never heard of William Skull who really didn't want to do that fight. He was just doing it basically to get the belt back that they took from him, so they could make this fight with Terence Crawford, the undisputed champion. That was sort of the game plan that Turkey and the teams wanted to do. So I don't think he was all that motivated. But I knew that they'd be motivated for each other. And if you watch the fight, it was very obvious they were highly motivated for each other. And Crawford did a great job. You said, what did he do really well? Number one, he avoided the big punch. He was not afraid to stand there and fight. My question was, what's the weight that he's going to come in at? If he goes all the way up or really close to 168, he's going to be there to stand and fight to some degree if he has to. He comes in a little later, 63, 64, something like that. I felt like he's going to want to use his legs a bit more, retain some of the speed and maybe try to box and move. When I saw he was 167.5, I'm like, okay, Crawford's here. Not going to get into like an all-out rumble necessarily, but he's going to stand there and he's going to fight the guy. And if you watch the fight, what did he do? He stood there and he fought in spots. He stood in the pocket right in front of Canelo Alvarez, dared him to throw punches, and he did enough to move away and miss at least the brunt of the shots. And there were times, particularly in the last couple of rounds, where the supposed small guy is walking Canelo Alvarez down, backing him up and going upside his head. I mean, it was a really good offensive and defensive performance from Crawford that was just good enough to beat back what Canelo had to offer. I thought it was a close fight. Some people rip me because they think it was a 10-2 kind of fight. I didn't see it like that, but there's no doubt that Crawford won the fight. He did so because of the way he closed up at the end of the fight, those last 2-3 rounds. So for me, I always talk about the range of acceptable scores. If you tell me you think that Crawford was the winner 7-5, I'm down with that. You want to tell me you think he won? Maybe if you gave him every benefit of the doubt, you can see it. Certainly you can see it 8-4, maybe 9-3 if you're generous. But that was sort of the way the fight went. To me, 7-5, 8-4 was the right score for Crawford. And at the end of the day, that's how the judges had it. He got the win. It was a historical victory for him.
The debate is rumbling on about where Crawford ranks in the all-time list: five-weight world champion, 3-time undisputed champion. Have you come up with your idea, your list on where you're putting him?
Well, first of all, one thing I have never done, and it's nothing related to this fight between Canelo and Crawford, is I don't really get into making like the all-time placement until a guy's done with his career. And I'll give you this is sort of like an extreme example. But on the night that Roy Jones defeated John Ruiz and won the WBA heavyweight title, you could have at that moment said, boy, oh boy, this guy is like a top 5 fighter of all time. I mean, that's the way that Roy was rolling. I mean, he was just an absolutely brilliant fighter. He at that point had he had lost by a disqualification that he avenged by KO1 against Montel Griffin. And other than that, he'd been perfect. He had yet to have the trilogy with Antonio Tarver. And he was just a brilliant fighter. He'd won the titles from middleweight all the way to heavyweight, skipping over cruiserweight. So at that moment, you're like, this is one of the greatest fighters who ever walked the face of the earth. And then, of course, he had that decade-long decline where he suffered a lot of knockouts. And, it did touch up his legacy to a certain degree. It doesn't take away the decade that he spent as the pound-for-pound number one. But in terms of his all-time placement, he damaged himself. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Crawford is XYZ in terms of an all-time list when we don't know if he's going to fight one more time, 10 more times, or maybe never fight again. But to suffice to say, and the same thing goes with Canelo, both of them are among the all-time greats. They're both Lock Hall of Fame first ballot guys. And I look at it like this: if you don't put a guy in the top 10, it's not an insult to the man. If you are considered, let's say, a top 50 boxer of all time, you're pretty fucking good. You know what I mean? Like think about the thousands of people who have boxed over the course of their careers and over the course of the history of this sport. If you can find your way into that top 50, you're pretty damn good. And both Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford are in that sort of conversation, without a doubt. Do I put them in the top 10 of all time? Not ready to do that for either one of them, obviously. But really superb fighters, among the greatest, if not the greatest of this generation, post Mayweather Pacquiao. I mean, brilliant fighters and have the accomplishment to prove it.
Like you say, we don't know what either man's going to do next. I believe there's no rematch clause. But your gut feeling on what happens next for both?
Well, I'm pretty sure that both of these guys will fight again. I mean, Crawford, if he retired, I guess it wouldn't be a complete shocker, but I'm very confident that Canelo will go again. He does still have 2 more fights with Turkey. It's not, I guess he could retire and not do those fights, I guess, but I suspect they'll both be back. The question is, who are they going to fight? And that's a hard one because typically when these big mega fights are over, there's still something you might look to and like, hey, there's this sort of mountain to conquer potentially, or this opponent that people start calling out, or maybe another weight class to go to. I mean, in terms of the weight, Canelo, I don't think is going back to light heavyweight, so maybe he stays at super middleweight. Originally, before the fight, the conversation was if he were the winner, maybe he'd fight Hamza Shiraz next. Maybe he would fight against the winner of the Chris Eubank Ben rematch. There was obviously going to be mandatories that he was facing in organizations. I mean, so there was a pathway to one of those types of fights. And with Crawford, I mean, he's maxed out as far as the weight goes. He's not going to 175. I mean, he was asked about that at the press conference. You know, he kind of laughed at it. He made it very clear he's not going back to 154. So all the people that might say, well, he should go back down to 54 and fight a Boots Ennis, who's just coming up to 154, I pretty much doubt that's happening. So it's interesting. I mean, I guess there could theoretically be a rematch. I don't think so, but if Turkey wants it, I mean, he's paying for it, so maybe he could convince them to do that. I'm not sure what would be entirely different. I don't know if the world needs to see that. So for me, you know, if Canelo took one of those solid fights against one of the top super middleweights, I'd be okay with that. And in terms of Terence Crawford, if I could pick, I would like to see him go to middleweight and make the history of becoming a 6th division world champion. It's not a superstar laden division, but you know what? Could you make a fight with Erislandy Lara? Could you make a fight with Carlos Adames? Could you make a fight with the unified title holder Janibek? You know, if he were to take any of those fights, just for the historical aspect of becoming a 6th division world champion, I think that would be an interesting plan. I think a lot of people would be intrigued by that to see if he could do that type of history. You know, I remember it's not quite the same, but like when Pernell Whitaker was welterweight champion and, you know, couldn't find big names and nobody really wanted to fight the guy and he was dominating and he was on the top of the pound for pound list. He was like, I'm going to go to 154 and try to win another title. And even though he wasn't fighting like a big name in Julio Cesar Vasquez, there was some spice to it because here's, you know, this all-time great, this pound for pound guy. He's going to jump up and try to win a belt in yet another weight class. He had won his first title at lightweight. Now he's going all the way to junior middleweight. And they kind of made a thing out of it. And he was able to win the title. And then after that was over, he went back down to the welterweight division. Now, obviously, with Crawford, he'd be going down to middleweight where he's already champion at 168. But at least it could be something that they could make hay with and probably make some type of promotion out of because of the history that would be at stake for him.
Just moving on, yesterday they had the press conference for Eubank and Ben, that rematch, November 15th. Obviously, Chris put some accusations out about Matchroom or Eddie delaying his ambulance, leaving from the first fight. Eddie since said that he's looking to sue Eubank for the comments. Your reaction to that, and is he saying it, you know, just throwing it out there to sell a fight, or is he like, what do you make of it?
Well, if you're trying to sell a fight, I think you do it with the opponent, not with the promoter. I mean, if you go back to the first fight, he made all kinds of wacky accusations and said terrible things about Frank Warren. And if I'm not mistaken, Frank did sue him. And so now I guess, you know, Frank, he didn't want to tangle with him again. So now he has to go after Eddie Hearn in the rematch. I mean, Chris got a screw loose, it seems to me. I mean, focus on your opponent. I mean, you can accuse Eddie Hearn of a lot of things, I suppose. And Lord knows he doesn't need me to defend him. But anybody that would think that a promoter would somehow purposely delay a medical attention for the athlete and in terms of an ambulance to a hospital, I think is lost their fucking mind. Again, you want to accuse Eddie of this, that, or the other thing, you know, have at it. But to think that Eddie Hearn, you know, who's grown up in the sport, is going to delay medical attention for one of the athletes on one of the events is, to me, utter lunacy. So I'm not sure if Chris is just, sly as a fox or just a dummy. But either way, it's not an appropriate line of conversation. I don't understand why he would do that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You want to talk shit about Conor Benn, not about, you know, some fantasy about an ambulance at a previous fight.
Are you excited for the rematch?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it'd be another great fight. I mean, I think right now the first fight, there's other competition. But for me, given the nature of the action and the magnitude of the event and the hoopla and the drama of the atmosphere and the whole thing, for me, I think it's the fight of the year so far. I mean, there's other good candidates. We saw one on Saturday on the undercard of Canelo and Crawford with that outstanding fight between Christian and Billy and Lester Martinez. You got the great flyweight title fight from Japan earlier in the year between Taraji and Akui. But Conor Benn and Eubank, even though it wasn't for a world title, but the combination, like I said, the atmosphere in that stadium, the crowd, the action of the fight, that 12th round, the drama of the reunion between Chris and his father. I mean, there was just so much going on there. And the extension of the rivalry between their dads, those great fights from the 90s. So, yeah, I'm pumped up for the rematch. I think it'll be another great fight.
Just closing off, Dan, we unfortunately heard hours after Canelo Crawford ended the tragic passing of Ricky Hatton, a legend in Britain, and someone who made his mark in the US as well. Yeah, just your memories of Ricky and your reflections.
Yeah, that was rough, man. I was in my room after the fight, and I was still, I was up late. I was, wired up, so I wasn't like ready to go to bed. I was still writing some stuff, and I saw that come across my social media. I was just like, oh man, that's just like what a terrible thing. I know Ricky had his issues and his problems, but look, I had a chance to know Ricky and cover 6 of his fights in America. Some of the biggest events I've ever covered in terms of just the magnitude and the hype and the hoopla and the excitement level for those fights. Most notably, the fight against Floyd Mayweather and the fight against Manny Pacquiao. But the thing I always liked about Ricky Hatton was that he was the same guy that I met when he was like 7-0 in Atlantic City, fighting at a preliminary on a Prince Nassim Hamed undercard. When he was not a big name, he wasn't a world champion. He was just a young kid trying to make his way. But he had that sort of same demeanor and same attitude and same friendly nature about him, all the years later when he was one of the biggest stars in boxing. In other words, he didn't change. A lot of guys, they get to a certain level in boxing. I've seen this happen many times. You're watching or covering or interviewing a young prospect, and you watch them on the way up the ladder. And when they get to the point where they become a champion or they start making a ton of money and they get a lot of fans and a lot of adulation, they start reading their press clippings. Something about them changes. Maybe they're not as friendly. Their demeanor changes a bit. They're not as welcoming. They're a little more gruff. They don't like doing the interviews. Hatton never changed. I always appreciated that about him. He was always a cool guy, no matter whether he was, up or down. Just always was great with the media. I always appreciated that. Had some good times with him in Vegas. Sitting having. I mean, I told the story a couple of days ago. I can remember times like at Mandalay Bay. Ricky, even if he wasn't his fight, he would come in to Vegas, to support like some other British fighter, and they would set up like a little lunch with like 2, 3, 4 of the American writers, and we'd go and hang out. And it wasn't even like a specific story. You're just like shoot the shit about this and that, and hope you might get a good story out of it to write a column or something like that. Ricky could not have been better to deal with. There's a reason why the fans liked him, because he was the everyman. He never changed. He fought for them. He fought for himself, but he always gave his great effort. The fans loved him for that. And like I said, he was the everyman. He didn't think he was better than you just because he was a famous athlete and had made, a crazy amount of money. And he delivered some of the most memorable events that you could imagine in boxing. I mean, to this day, and I would say this even if it wasn't, we were discussing the fact that unfortunately, Ricky has passed, but Mayweather Hatton was as colossal and as monumental of a fight week as I've ever been to. I mean, and it wasn't necessarily, Floyd was obviously part of that, but it was really because of, the tens of thousands of fans of Ricky's that came from the UK to visit Vegas. I make the point many times. The MGM Grand Garden Arena, Jonathan, holds about 18,000 people for a boxing event. They had like 30,000+ people that transcended that came to Las Vegas. They can't give them all tickets. They just came to take in the festivities and to party and, sing their songs. And it was just a remarkable event. Ricky Hatton, this, young guy from Manchester, the everyman, that was the reason why. It was a beautiful thing. So nothing but love for Ricky Hatton. I mean, I'm sure people watch these videos. I don't know if you can see right now, I've got the Ricky Hatton mask on my bulletin board behind there. That's not in honor of Ricky because he passed. That's been there for years. I guess it's always one of my favorite little things I picked up at a fight. So I've always had him on display there.
Yeah, I've always seen that in the interviews we've done, and like you say, very sad news and thoughts with his family.
Just such a bummer. I mean, so unfortunate. Only 46 years old. It's just and he was making the plans to do the comeback. I actually, Jonathan, I had just in July when that fight got announced, the fight that he was going to have in the UAE. Not like I was in touch with Ricky like every day or anything, but every once in a while we would message each other. And when that fight was finalized and announced, I messaged him. I had a question or two just about just a sort of was it 8-rounder or was it a 10-rounder or whatever, but also, how you doing? Good luck with everything. And so we had a couple of the direct message exchanges during that day. And unfortunately, that was, like I said, mid to late July. So that's the last time I ever communicated with Ricky, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it's very sad news, and like I said, the thoughts are with his family. Dan, I'm going to leave it there. Appreciate your time.
You bet.
danrafael.substack.com and bigfightweekend.com. Or is it .co.uk? .com?
The website is .com. We also have our Big Fight Weekend podcast and our YouTube
That's
channel,
it.
Big Fight Weekend YouTube channel.
Yeah, so all the links will be in the description. Make sure you check it out, subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon, Dan. Appreciate it.
Okay, appreciate it, Jonathan. Thanks, man.